Hey now, tick-tock talking at you. And today we have with us a watch that really needs no introduction. It is the legendary Glycine Airman. Now this watch has been the choice of Vietnam fighter pilots, NASA astronauts, and servicemen throughout the world since its introduction in 1953. And just taking a look at it, you can see why. It's got that beautiful, clean 24-hour dial. Now, there weren't many watches in this 24-hour format, and Glycine is certainly the most famous. The other watch that would come to mind would be the Breitling Navitimer Cosmonaut, but that was a very expensive watch. It was, I find, busy. The dial is a little difficult to read, where the Glycine is not as expensive. It's got a beautiful, clean, easy-to-read 24-hour dial and has many features that military personnel would find very attractive. Well, first of all, as I've mentioned, this watch has a very clean, easy-to-read dial with a 24-hour time scale, perfect for military, and with those big luminescent hands, very, very easy to read. Also, if you notice, there is a second time scale in 24 hours on the bezel, which locks at this lower crown. And that allowed you to set the watch to a second time zone, which was very useful for men serving overseas if they wanted to keep track of what time it was back home where they would contact their loved ones. But perhaps the most unique feature for a military personnel of this watch was the way that you could hack the time. Now, when you hack the time, that means you stop and synchronize your watch with your fellow soldiers. And normally, with most watches, you press in the crown, and the time starts to run. But what Glycine did is it does not stop the movement when you pull out the crown. Now, let's see if I can do this without shaking the camera too much. When I pull out the crown, you notice that the sweep hand does not stop. What's happened is it has extended a very small wire through a hole here at the 24-hour mark. So all I have to do is wait for that sweep hand to come back around, and it will always stop perfectly at 24 and allow you to hack the time down to the second with your fellow soldiers. You really a unique, very cool take on a function that was in other watches, but never quite executed this way. And as you can see here, we're about to get up to it right now. Isn't that cool? So, as I said, this particular model dates from 1967-68. It was the personal watch of Command Sergeant Major Otis, who was the highest-ranking non-commissioned officer in the Vietnam theater at that time. So it has a very cool provenance. I love military watches, especially ones that you can actually trace back to military personnel. Though this watch is the most common style of the Glycine Airman, it's still made today with the black dial. The watch actually dates back to 1953. And that watch was this one. This is a first generation 1953 Airman. The differences are striking. You still have the 24-hour dial and the 24-hour bezel, but as you can see, the hands were in a Dauphine style, and they actually put AM, PM, noon on the dial to indicate whether it was night or day, since the 24-hour format would have been usual for most people. They're the same size. The cases are still 36 millimeter. They really didn't change it all that much. The movement in the original one was a Felsa 692. Later ones have a Schild 1701. But other than that, the watch really has not changed all that much. They did also in 1955 add a Cyclops window to the date, so it was easier to see. By the way, that window should be a rectangle. If you see them with a circle, that is an incorrect crystal, and a lot of them are floating. A lot of the vintage ones are floating around there, but the circle magnifier is not correct for the watch. Now finally, we come to this bad boy right here. In my search to own all things Glycine. This, on first glance, looks like another Glycine Airman. But this bad boy is the Glycine the Chief. Now, what's that, you're asking yourself? Well, 1955, Glycine had been producing the Airman for a number of years, and it had been quite popular with pilots, and they said, hey, why don't we try to pitch one to the Navy? And we'll call it the Chief, after the Chief Petty Officer. Like the Airman was for pilots, the Chief would be for the Navy. So they made 25 of them, and they sold them through the Toulouse jewelry shops at the airport in Geneva. And needless to say, it was an epic failure. First of all, Switzerland is landlocked. Not a lot of Navy personnel traveling through the Geneva airport, so the watches just did not sell. This particular example is the only known surviving of that 25 run. No other vintage ones have surfaced, at least to this point, of the Chief. It is reproduced today. You can buy the watch, just as you see here, more or less. It tends to look a little bit more like the more modern Glycine with the Chief name on it. But the original Chief, this is it, the only one. So that is the story of the Glycine. You can sort of see the progression there. Another little thing is the Glycine came in this really funky little wooden box. They still make it today. When you buy a Glycine, you will get a box just like this. What I also like about it is, you see this little hole? There's a hole here and a hole there. That was so when you sent the watch back in for service, you would, write your name on this side, you'd slide it back in, and you'd wire it shut so they could send the watch in for service, and then they would return it to you in a new box. I just think that's kind of neat. So anyway, that's TikTok Talkin' for this time. I will be back again with watches, sports watches, the 50s, 60s, and 70s. But for today, stay well, stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon.